Morning fog clung to Highway 12 like a grey shroud. The twisted metal screamed against wet asphalt as Michael Brooks pulled the unconscious woman from the smoking wreckage. Her blood-stained fingers clutched something silver. A necklace. Delicate, ancient, familiar. The lotus pendant caught the pale Oregon sunlight, and Michael's world tilted. He knew this piece. Every curve, every detail. His mother's jewelry box. 25 years ago. Before she vanished without a word. The woman's eyes fluttered open in his arms, meeting his with recognition that shouldn't exist. She whispered his name. Impossible. They'd never met. Tommy tugged at his father's sleeve, 8-year-old voice cutting through the morning silence. But Michael couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't look away from the necklace that was supposed to be lost forever. Michael Brooks had learned to live with ghosts. At 40, his weathered hands told stories of engines rebuilt and hearts broken. The garage on Pine Street had been his sanctuary for 15 years, ever since Sarah's cancer took her and left him drowning in medical bills and single fatherhood. Tommy was 8 now, gap-toothed and curious, with Sarah's gentle eyes and Michael's stubborn chin. The boy asked about his grandmother sometimes, the woman who disappeared when Michael was 15. Michael always changed the subject. Some wounds were too deep to explain to a child. The call came at 7:30 that Tuesday morning. Car accident on Highway 12, just outside Millbrooks city limits. Michael wasn't a first responder, but his garage truck was the closest to the scene when dispatch crackled over the radio. He'd pulled over without thinking, muscle memory from his volunteer firefighter days kicking in. Tommy had been riding shotgun, heading to school early for basketball practice. The boy now stood pressed against the truck's bumper, watching paramedics load the young woman onto a stretcher. Her dark hair spread across the white pillow like spilled ink. "Dad, is she gonna be okay?" Tommy's voice carried that particular tremor children get when they first see mortality up close. Michael squeezed his son's shoulder, eyes still fixed on the ambulance doors closing. The necklace burned in his pocket like a coal. He'd slipped it from her fingers before the paramedics arrived, some instinct telling him to keep it safe. Keep it secret. The woman couldn't be more than 22, 23 at most. Far too young to possess something that belonged to Catherine Brooks, a woman who'd been gone for 25 years. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and broken promises. Michael sat in the waiting room, Tommy beside him working on homework with determined focus. The necklace lay heavy in Michael's palm, its silver chain catching fluorescent light. He remembered the day his mother left. October 13th, 1999. She'd kissed his forehead at breakfast, hummed while washing dishes, then simply never came home from her errands. No note, no explanation, just absence where warmth used to be. His father had thrown himself into drinking and died 3 years later, leaving Michael truly alone at 18. Elena Harper. That was the name on her driver's license. Portland address, expired registration, and a business card from Morrison and Associates Architecture tucked behind a $20 bill. Michael studied the card while Tommy dozed against his shoulder. The waiting was the hardest part, watching nurses bustle past with clipboards and worried expressions. When the doctor finally emerged, her smile was tired but reassuring. Concussion, 3 stitches, bruised ribs. Elena would be fine, but they wanted to keep her overnight for observation. Michael nodded, slipped the necklace back into his pocket, and wondered why he didn't just leave. Elena's eyes were the color of storm clouds when she finally woke. Michael had been sitting beside her bed for 2 hours, Tommy curled in the visitor's chair with Michael's jacket draped over his small frame. She blinked slowly, taking in the hospital room, the machines, the stranger holding her silver necklace between his fingers. "You dropped this," Michael said, his voice rougher than intended. Elena's hand went to her throat instinctively, then reached out to touch the pendant. Her fingers brushed his, and something electric passed between them. Not attraction, exactly. Recognition. Like puzzle pieces finding their fit. "Thank you." Her voice was soft, musical, with the faint accent of someone who'd moved around a lot as a child. "I never take it off. It belonged to my mother." Michael's chest tightened. He watched Elena's face as she spoke, searching for familiar features in the slope of her nose, the curve of her jaw. Nothing obvious, nothing concrete. But something in her eyes reminded him of looking in mirrors as a teenager, trying to find Catherine's face in his own reflection. "She passed away last month," Elena continued, fingers closing around the necklace. "I came to Millbrook to settle her affairs." The words hit Michael like cold water. Catherine Brooks had died a month ago. Not Catherine Harper, not Catherine anybody else. Catherine Brooks, according to the obituary Elena showed him on her phone screen 3 days later. Born 1958. Died March 15th, 2025. Survived by her daughter, Elena Rose Harper. No mention of a son. No mention of the boy she'd left behind in a house that smelled like Old Spice and abandoned hopes. Michael stared at the small photo accompanying the text. Grey-haired, kind-faced, wearing the same lotus necklace now hanging around Elena's neck. Elena's car was beyond saving. The insurance adjuster took one look at the crumpled sedan and declared it totaled. Michael found himself offering his garage's services before his brain caught up with his mouth. Elena needed transportation, needed a place to stay while dealing with lawyers and estate sales. The room above Sarah's old art studio had been empty for 2 years. It wasn't much, just a bed and a kitchenette, but it was private and clean. Elena accepted with the grateful relief of someone who'd been sleeping in cheap motels and living on gas station coffee for weeks. Tommy took to Elena immediately, drawn by her patient answers to his endless questions and her ability to sketch cartoon characters on napkins during lunch. She helped him with homework, taught him to fold origami cranes, and listened with genuine interest to his rambling stories about school and friends and the fort he was building in the backyard. Michael watched them together from the garage bay. Oil-stained hands paused over an engine rebuild. Elena laughed at Tommy's jokes with real delight, not the forced politeness adults usually showed children. She ruffled his hair and called him kiddo, and looked at him like he mattered. "She's nice," Tommy announced one evening. Apropos of nothing, while they ate leftover pizza at the kitchen table. "Elena, I mean. She knows how to make pancakes look like squares. Says it's called architect pancakes." Michael smiled despite himself. Elena had been staying above the studio for a week, and already she'd become part of their routine. Morning coffee shared in comfortable silence. Tommy's backpack checked for forgotten homework. Small gestures that felt dangerously close to domestic bliss. Michael caught himself looking forward to these moments, then feeling guilty about it. Sarah had been gone 2 years, but moving on still felt like betrayal. Elena knew her way around Millbrook like someone who'd lived there before. She directed Michael to the old cemetery without GPS, knew which roads flooded during spring rains, remembered when the downtown movie theater had been a 5 and dime store. When Michael asked about it, she'd pause with that distant look people get when accessing half-buried memories. "My mother used to tell me stories about this place," she'd say finally. "I guess some of them stuck." But Catherine's stories had gaps, Elena admitted, missing pieces that never quite made sense. The photographs were Elena's undoing. Michael found them while helping her sort through Catherine's belongings in the storage unit downtown. Box after box of carefully preserved memories. Elena's school pictures, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, and tucked beneath layers of tissue paper, a manila envelope marked "Before" in Catherine's careful handwriting. Inside were pictures from the 1980s and 90s. Catherine as a young mother, radiant and laughing. And in several photos, a serious-faced boy with Michael's exact features at ages 5, 8, 12. Elena's hands shook as she held up a school portrait of 15-year-old Michael, his signature reluctant smile frozen in time. "Who is this?" Elena's voice was barely a whisper. Michael took the photo with hands that felt disconnected from his body. He'd never seen this particular picture before, didn't remember Catherine having copies of his school photos. But there he was, wearing the blue flannel shirt she'd bought him for picture day, the shirt he'd been wearing the morning she left. On the back, Catherine's handwriting. "Michael, freshman year, my beautiful boy." The words were like knives. Beautiful boy. She'd called him that every morning while packing his lunch, every night while tucking him in, until the day she decided he wasn't worth staying for. Elena's face went pale as understanding dawned. She looked from the photograph to Michael, then back again, seeing the resemblance that had been nagging at her subconscious for days. "You're him," she breathed. "You're the son she never talked about." Michael wanted to deny it, wanted to find some other explanation for the photographs and the necklace and the way Elena's presence felt like coming home to a place he'd never been. But the evidence was overwhelming. Catherine Brooks had 2 children. She'd raised one and abandoned the other. She'd loved Elena enough to stay, and loved Michael too little to matter. The confrontation came 3 days later. Elena had spent those days in the storage unit, reading through Catherine's journals and letters, piecing together a timeline that made Michael's stomach churn. Catherine had left Millbrook in October 1999 with a man named David Harper, Elena's father. She'd been pregnant with Elena at the time, though she hadn't known it yet. The journals spoke of impossible choices, of a 15-year-old son who was better off with his father, of starting fresh somewhere new. Catherine had convinced herself that Michael would be fine, that teenagers needed their fathers more than their mothers anyway. "She wrote about you," Elena said, standing in Michael's garage with a shoebox full of letters under her arm. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her voice hollow. "Every year on your birthday, every Christmas. She wondered if you were happy, if you'd graduated, if you'd found someone to love. But she never tried to contact you. She said she'd burned that bridge and had no right to rebuild it." Michael's hands clenched into fists. 25 years of wondering if his mother was alive or dead, and she'd been in Portland the whole time, playing house with her new family. Writing sentimental letters about the son she'd thrown away like yesterday's newspaper. "Did she ever mention that I spent my 16th birthday alone?" Michael's voice was deadly quiet. "That my father drank himself to death by the time I was 18? That I had to drop out of college to pay for his funeral?" Elena flinched with each word, tears starting to fall. Michael knew he was being cruel, but the anger felt good after decades of careful numbness. "Did she write about how I learned to cook and do laundry and fix broken things because there was no one else? How I worked 3 jobs to keep the house she abandoned? Or was it all just, 'I wonder how my beautiful boy is doing' bullshit?" Elena set the shoebox down with shaking hands. She was young when she left. Scared. She made mistakes. Her voice carried the desperate tone of someone trying to defend the indefensible. "David threatened to leave if she brought you along. She thought you'd be better with your father, thought you'd have more opportunities here." Michael laughed, a bitter sound that made Tommy look up from his homework in the corner. "Opportunities like watching my dad drink himself to death? Like raising myself because Catherine Brooks decided I wasn't worth the inconvenience? Yeah, real opportunities there." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Tommy had stopped pretending to work on his math problems, his young face creased with confusion and worry. Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, looking suddenly fragile and very young. "I didn't know," she whispered. "She never told me any of this. I grew up thinking my father died before I was born, that it was always just me and Mom. If I'd known you existed, if I'd known what she'd done, She trailed off, because what could she say? What words could bridge 25 years of abandonment and lies? But you did know something was wrong, Michael said, his anger cooling into something harder and more painful. You said she had gaps in her stories, missing pieces. She never talked about her life before Portland, did she? Never mentioned friends from high school or old boyfriends or family traditions, because she was running from all of it, running from me. Elena nodded miserably. Catherine had always deflected questions about the past, changing the subject whenever Elena pressed for details about her childhood or extended family. There were no grandparents in Elena's life, no aunts or uncles or family reunions, just Catherine's careful explanations about being an only child from a small family. Robert Hayes arrived on a Thursday morning like a thundercloud rolling over the mountains. He stepped out of a pristine BMW, wearing a suit that cost more than Michael made in a month, his eyes scanning the garage with barely concealed disdain. "Elena," he called, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "We need to talk." Elena emerged from the storage room where she'd been cataloguing Catherine's books, her face flushing with recognition and something that might have been fear. Robert Hayes, senior partner at Morrison & Associates, the man who'd offered Elena her first real job out of college. The man who'd been calling her phone every day since she'd left Portland. "I've been worried sick," Robert continued, crossing the garage in 3 long strides. He was handsome in the way successful men often are, silver-haired and confident, with the kind of smile that made promises it had no intention of keeping. "You disappeared without notice, Eleanor. Left us scrambling on the Henderson project. This isn't like you." His eyes found Michael, dismissing him in a single glance before returning to Elena. "I've brought papers for the Sacramento project. Full partnership track, 50% raise, company car. But we need to leave today. The client presentation is Monday morning." Elena's face went pale. "Robert, I told you I needed time to settle my mother's estate. The funeral was only a month ago." Robert's expression softened with practiced sympathy. "I understand you're grieving, sweetheart, but hiding away in this—" He gestured vaguely at the garage, at Michael's oil-stained work clothes, at Tommy's homework spread across a card table. "This isn't going to bring her back. You have a career, a future. Don't throw it away for some misguided attempt at finding yourself in your mother's hometown." Michael felt Tommy move closer to his side, the boy's instincts picking up on the tension crackling through the air. Robert's presence filled the garage like expensive cologne, overwhelming and cloying. Everything about the man screamed money and influence, from his Italian shoes to his platinum watch. He was everything Michael wasn't, everything Elena probably deserved. "The offer expires at midnight," Robert said, his tone shifting to something harder. "After that, I can't guarantee there will be other opportunities. The architecture world is small, Elena. Word gets around about people who are unreliable." Elena's hands twisted together, a gesture Michael had learned meant she was wrestling with something painful. "I need more time," she said finally. "There are things here I need to figure out. Family things." Robert's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Family? Elena, your mother is dead. There's no family left to figure out." His eyes flicked to Michael again, this time with calculation. "Unless you're talking about playing house with the local mechanic and his kid? Is that what this is about? Some fantasy about small-town life and simple pleasures?" The words hung in the air like smoke. Michael felt his face flush with anger and something deeper, more humiliating. Shame. Because Robert wasn't entirely wrong. Elena was educated, sophisticated, talented. She had a future waiting for her in Sacramento, opportunities that Millbrook could never offer. What did Michael have to give her except a failing garage and a life defined by what he'd lost, rather than what he'd gained? "Maybe he's right," Michael said quietly, the words tasting like ashes. "Maybe you should go." Elena's head snapped toward him, her eyes wide with hurt and disbelief. Michael, no, that's not what I want. But the damage was done. Robert smiled with the satisfaction of a man who'd played his cards perfectly. Think about it, Elena. Really think. What kind of life can you build here? What kind of future are you choosing? He handed her a folder thick with contracts and photographs of glass office buildings. The jet leaves from Portland at 6. I'll wait in town until 5:30. Don't make the wrong choice. After Robert left, the garage felt smaller somehow, contaminated by his presence and his truths. Elena sat on an overturned crate, the contract folder unopened in her lap. Tommy had retreated to his homework, but his crayon strokes were angry and jagged. Michael focused on the engine he'd been rebuilding, his hands working automatically while his mind churned. Elena deserved better than Millbrook, better than him. She deserved glass towers and important projects, and a future that wasn't haunted by Catherine's ghosts. I'm not going, Elena said suddenly, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Michael's hands stilled on the engine. I know what you're thinking, she continued. That Robert's right, that I don't belong here, that I'm just running away from reality. But this is reality, Michael. You're real. Tommy's real. What we've been building here is real. She stood up, walked over to where he was working, her reflection wavering in the chrome he'd been polishing. I've spent my whole life feeling like something was missing, like I was only getting half the story. Now I know why. Michael straightened, wiping his hands on a shop rag. Elena, you can't base your life on some need to fix your mother's mistakes. Catherine made her choice 25 years ago. That's not your burden to carry. Elena shook her head, stepping closer. This isn't about Catherine. This is about us, about the family we could choose to become. The word hung between them, heavy with possibility and fear. Family. The thing Michael had lost at 15 and never quite figured out how to rebuild. The thing Elena had thought she'd had until she learned it was built on lies and omissions. What about Tommy? Elena asked, gesturing toward the boy who was pretending not to listen while he colored. What about the way he lights up when I help him with homework or teach him to fold paper airplanes? What about the way you smile when you think I'm not looking? Are you really going to throw all of that away because some man in an expensive suit made you feel small? Michael looked at his son, saw the hope and fear warring in the boy's young face. Tommy had lost one mother already. Was Michael really going to let him lose another? The decision came not in a grand gesture, but in a moment of quiet desperation. Elena walked to her car, Robert's contract still unopened, her suitcase in the back seat. Michael watched from the garage doorway, Tommy's hand slipping into his. Dad, Tommy whispered, are you going to let her go? The question cut through all of Michael's fears and insecurities, reducing them to their essential truth. He was terrified. Terrified of loving someone who might leave. Terrified of giving Tommy hope that could be shattered. Terrified of believing he deserved happiness after so many years of simply surviving. But fear, Michael realized, was just another kind of prison. He'd been locked inside it for 25 years, ever since Catherine walked out and taught him that love was temporary and family was fragile. Elena wasn't Catherine. Elena had come back every time she'd had a reason to leave, had chosen them over opportunities and obligations and the safe, predictable life she'd built in Portland. Elena, wait, he called, jogging across the parking lot. She turned, hope and uncertainty mingled in her expression. Don't go, he said simply. Please, whatever happens, don't go. 1 week later, on a Tuesday that dawned clear and cold, Michael's phone rang at 3 a.m. Elena's voice was tight with panic. Michael, something's wrong with Tommy. He won't wake up and he's burning with fever. Michael was already reaching for his clothes, his heart hammering against his ribs. Tommy had been fighting what they'd thought was a simple cold. Nothing serious enough to keep him home from school, but children could turn critical so quickly, their small bodies overwhelmed by infections that adults could shrug off. "I'm calling an ambulance," Elena continued. "Meet us at the hospital." The emergency room was a blur of bright lights and urgent voices. Tommy lay small and still on the gurney, his face flushed with fever, his breathing shallow and rapid. "Pneumonia," the doctor explained. "Bacterial infection, aggressive but treatable with the right antibiotics." But Tommy would need to stay in the hospital for several days, possibly a week. Michael felt the familiar panic of a single parent faced with medical crisis, the weight of making decisions that could affect his child's entire future. Elena appeared at his elbow like an anchor in rough seas, her hand warm and steady on his shoulder. "I'll stay," Elena said without being asked. "However long it takes, I'll stay." She'd quit her job at Morrison and Associates the day before, burning bridges with the same decisive finality Catherine had shown 25 years earlier. But Elena's choice felt different, rooted in love rather than fear, in building something new rather than running from something old. She'd used her savings to help Michael catch up on the garage's rent, had started taking design clients in the neighboring towns, was slowly building a life that belonged to both of them. Tommy recovered slowly, his resilience returning in increments measured by appetite and laughter. Elena read him stories, brought him puzzles from the hospital gift shop, sat beside his bed during the long nighttime hours when Michael dozed fitfully in the visitor's chair. On the third day, while Tommy napped, Elena showed Michael the letter she'd found in Catherine's jewelry box. The paper was yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. "My darling Elena," it began. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've finally met your brother." The letter explained everything Catherine had been too ashamed to say while she was alive. How she'd loved Michael desperately, but felt trapped by circumstances and poor choices. How she'd convinced herself that leaving him with his father was an act of love rather than abandonment. How she'd regretted her decision every day for 25 years, but had been too proud and too afraid to try to make amends. "Michael was the light of my life until I met your father," Catherine had written. "I thought I had to choose between my past and my future. I chose wrong, and I've paid for it every day since." "She left you something," Elena said, pulling a small velvet box from her purse. Inside was a man's watch, simple and elegant, with an inscription on the back. "To Michael, my beautiful boy. Love always, Mom." The watch had stopped at 10:47, the exact time Catherine had died. Elena had been holding her hand, had seen the moment life left her mother's eyes. "She said your name at the end," Elena whispered. "She said, 'Tell Michael I'm sorry.'" Michael held out the watch carefully, feeling its weight against his palm. It wasn't enough to erase 25 years of absence, but it was something. A bridge across the chasm Catherine had created. Tommy was released on a Friday morning, wobbly but grinning, clutching a balloon shaped like a dinosaur that Elena had bought from the hospital volunteers. They drove home through October sunshine that painted the Oregon hills in shades of gold and crimson. The garage looked different somehow, more like home, and less like a place where Michael was just marking time. Elena had hung Tommy's artwork on the office walls, had planted flowers in the window boxes, had filled the empty spaces with laughter and conversation, and the kind of domestic happiness Michael had forgotten was possible. That evening, while Tommy built elaborate structures with his blocks on the living room floor, Michael and Elena sat on the back porch watching the sunset paint the sky in watercolor streaks. "Are you sorry?" Michael asked. "About the job? About Robert? About staying here instead of taking on the world?" Elena smiled, her hand finding his across the space between their chairs. "I spent 22 years feeling like I was missing something," she said. "Turns out I was missing this, missing you, missing the chance to be part of something real." The lotus necklace caught the dying light as Eleanor moved, its silver surface warm from her skin. She'd had it cleaned and polished, had taken it to a jeweler in Portland who'd told her it was worth more as an heirloom than as precious metal. "I want Tommy to have it someday," Elena said. "When he's old enough to understand what it means, not as a reminder of what Catherine took away, but as a symbol of what we found despite her mistakes." Michael nodded, understanding. The necklace would carry forward the love that had survived Catherine's abandonment, the family that had formed from broken pieces and healing hearts. 6 months later, on a spring morning when the cherry trees bloomed like snow against the green Oregon hills, Michael woke to the sound of laughter from the kitchen. Elena and Tommy were making pancakes, their voices mixing in comfortable conversation about school projects and weekend plans. The normalcy of it still caught Michael off guard sometimes, the simple miracle of family breakfast and shared calendars and arguments over who'd forgotten to take out the trash. He'd lived alone for so long that domesticity felt like a foreign language he was slowly learning to speak. Tommy had grown 3 inches since Elena arrived, his face losing some of its little boy roundness as he stretched toward the teenager he'd someday become. He wore the watch Catherine had left Michael, not because it fit his 8-year-old wrist, but because he liked the weight of family history against his skin. Elena had taken the lotus pendant to a jeweler, had it made into a charm that hung from Tommy's backpack alongside his house key and a miniature flashlight. The boy collected symbols, the way other children collected baseball cards, each meaningful object a talisman against the fear that happiness was temporary. "Dad, Elena's teaching me to draw blueprints," Tommy announced when Michael appeared in the kitchen doorway. The kitchen table was covered with graph paper and colored pencils, sketches of impossible houses with rooms for everything an 8-year-old considered essential. A slide from the 2nd floor to the 1st, a moat around the perimeter, a tower for watching stars. Elena had encouraged Tommy's architectural fantasies, had taught him about load-bearing walls and foundation requirements, had shown him how dreams could be made manifest through careful planning and hard work. Michael poured coffee from the pot Elena had started, added the cream she bought because she'd noticed he liked his coffee pale. Small gestures of attention and care had accumulated over the months, building a foundation stronger than romance or passion. They were partners now in the daily work of raising a child and running a business and healing from the wounds the past had carved in both their hearts. The garage had become profitable again, helped by Elena's connections in Portland and her talent for designing efficient workspaces. She'd turned the office into something that looked more like a real business and less like a place where Michael was hiding from the world. "We're building something here," Elena said one evening, as they watched Tommy chase fireflies in the backyard. Her hand rested in Michael's, their fingers intertwined like puzzle pieces that had finally found their proper arrangement. Not just for us, but for him. So he grows up knowing that family isn't just about blood or obligation. It's about choosing to stay, choosing to fight for each other, choosing to build something beautiful from whatever materials you have. Michael squeezed her hand, understanding that she was talking about more than just their little household. She was talking about legacy, about the story they would leave behind for Tommy to carry forward. The old Catherine's house stood empty at the end of Maple Street, its windows dark and its garden overgrown with weeds. Elena had inherited it, along with the rest of Catherine's estate, but she couldn't bring herself to live in the place where her mother had nursed her guilt and regrets for 25 years. "We could fix it up," Michael suggested one Saturday afternoon as they stood looking at the peeling paint and sagging porch. "Turn it into something new." Elena nodded slowly, seeing possibilities in the bones of the structure. A workshop for Michael's custom motorcycle projects, a studio where she could meet with architectural clients, a playroom where Tommy could spread out his increasingly complex building projects. They worked on the house together through the summer, stripping wallpaper and refinishing floors and learning the satisfaction of creating beauty from neglect. Tommy helped by sorting screws and holding tools and offering suggestions that were surprisingly practical for someone who still believed chocolate milk came from brown cows. The physical work was therapeutic, each room they restored feeling like a small victory over the past. Catherine's ghost gradually faded from the corners, replaced by the living presence of the family she'd unknowingly brought together through her final gift of truth. Elena's business grew slowly but steadily, her reputation spreading through the network of small communities that dotted the Oregon coast. She specialized in sustainable homes and adaptive reuse projects, turning abandoned buildings into vibrant community spaces. Her work attracted attention from architectural magazines and environmental organizations, but she turned down offers to relocate to larger markets. Millbrook was home now, not just because Michael and Tommy were there, but because she'd found her place in the rhythm of small-town life. I used to think success meant living in a big city and working on important projects, Elena confided to Michael one evening as they sat on the porch of the renovated house, watching Tommy practice batting in the front yard. But this feels more important somehow, building something that lasts, something that makes a difference in people's daily lives. Michael understood. He'd spent years thinking success meant escaping Millbrook, proving he could rise above his father's failures and his mother's abandonment. Instead, he'd learned that success was quieter than he'd expected, measured in coffee shared before dawn and homework supervised after dinner, and the gradual accumulation of days that felt like home. Tommy turned 9 on a Tuesday in November, his birthday party held in the garage because Oregon rain had made outdoor celebrations impossible. Elena had decorated the space with streamers and balloons, had organized games that somehow made changing oil look like entertainment. The local children who attended seemed genuinely happy to be there, not just fulfilling social obligations. Tommy had friends now, real friends who came to the house after school and included him in their weekend adventures. Michael watched his son blow out birthday candles and make a wish he wouldn't share, and felt the deep satisfaction of a parent who'd managed to give his child something he'd never had himself: a stable, loving home. "What did you wish for?" Elena asked Tommy later, as they cleaned up paper plates and wrapping paper from the floor of the garage. Tommy grinned with the mischievous secrecy of a child who knew exactly how wish protocol worked. "Can't tell, or it won't come true, but it's something good." Michael suspected the wish had something to do with Eleanor officially becoming part of their family, a conversation they'd been dancing around for months without quite addressing directly. Marriage seemed both inevitable and terrifying, a public declaration of commitment that neither of them was quite ready to make. The conversation finally came on Christmas Eve as they sat beside a tree Elena had insisted they cut from the woods behind the renovated house. Tommy was asleep upstairs, worn out from a day of excitement and anticipation. The presents beneath the tree represented months of careful planning and saving, each gift chosen to reflect the recipient's dreams and interests. For Tommy, books about architecture and engineering, building sets that would challenge his growing spatial intelligence. For Elena, tools for her workshop and a commission for a public art project she'd been wanting to attempt. For Michael, motorcycle parts he'd been coveting and a vintage leather jacket Elena had found in a Portland consignment shop. "I love you," Elena said without preamble, the words simple and direct in the way that truth often is. "I love Tommy. I love this life we've built together. And I want to make it official, not because we have to, but because we want to. Because choosing each other every day should be celebrated, not just endured." Michael looked at her across the space between their chairs, this woman who'd appeared in his life like an answer to a prayer he hadn't known he was praying. She was wearing one of his old flannel shirts over jeans, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, her face free of makeup and glowing with firelight and happiness. "Yes?" Michael said. the word carrying the weight of 25 years of loneliness and fear and careful self-protection finally surrendering to hope. Yes, I want that too. Elena smiled, the expression transforming her entire face, and Michael understood that this was how healing happened. Not in grand gestures or dramatic revelations, but in quiet moments of choosing love over fear, connection over isolation, the future over the past. They would have challenges ahead, would face the ordinary difficulties that all families navigate, but they would face them together, as a unit forged from choice rather than obligation. Tommy found them asleep on the couch Christmas morning, curled together under the blanket Elena had crocheted during the long evenings of autumn. The boy shook them awake with the excited urgency of a child who'd been counting down to Christmas for what felt like decades. "Santa came," he announced, pointing to the presents that had mysteriously multiplied during the night. "And he ate the cookies, and he left a note." The note, written in Elena's careful script, thanked Tommy for being such a good boy and promised that the best present of all couldn't be wrapped or put under a tree. They opened presents in the living room of the renovated house, surrounded by the evidence of their shared labor and love. Tommy whooped with delight over his gifts, immediately began planning elaborate construction projects that would probably take over the entire backyard by summer. Elena cried happy tears over the art commission, recognizing it as both Michael's investment in her dreams and his faith in their shared future. Michael held the leather jacket against his chest, breathing in the scent of quality leather and possibility, understanding that some gifts were about more than the object itself. The last present was small, wrapped in tissue paper and tied with a ribbon Elena had saved from Catherine's jewelry box. Inside was a ring, simple and elegant, with a small diamond that caught the morning light streaming through the windows. Tommy had helped choose it, Elena explained, had insisted that it needed to be sparkly but not too sparkly, and pretty but not fancy. The boy had also contributed to the purchase with money from his allowance, a gesture that made Michael's throat tighten with emotion. "It's not just from me," Elena said, as Michael slipped the ring onto her finger, marveling at how perfectly it fit. "It's from all of us. A promise that we're choosing each other, choosing this family, choosing to build something beautiful from whatever materials we have." Michael kissed her then, tasting salt from her tears and sweetness from the Christmas cookies they'd eaten for breakfast. Tommy cheered and demanded to know if this meant Elena would officially be his mom now, and Elena gathered him into their embrace with the fierce protectiveness of someone who'd learned that family was too precious to take for granted. The wedding was small and simple, held in the backyard of the renovated house on a Saturday in May, when the Oregon spring was at its most seductive. Elena wore her mother's dress, altered to fit her smaller frame, the lotus necklace gleaming against the ivory silk. Michael wore his father's suit, taken in and updated but still carrying the weight of family history. Tommy served as best man and ring bearer and general master of ceremonies, his joy infectious enough to make even the most reserved guests smile. The guest list was deliberately small. Neighbors and friends from Millbrook, a few colleagues from Elena's architectural work, the scattered family members who'd remained part of Michael's life, despite his years of self-imposed isolation. The ceremony itself was brief and heartfelt, officiated by the local pastor who'd baptized Tommy and buried Sarah, and understood that marriage was both celebration and commitment, joy and responsibility. Elena and Michael exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises that acknowledged their past wounds while committing to their shared future. They spoke of choosing love over fear, of building something beautiful from broken pieces, of creating a legacy worth passing on to the children who would come after them. The reception took place in the garage, transformed by Elena's design skills and the collective effort of their friends into something magical. String lights hung from the rafters, tables made from sawhorses and plywood were covered with white sheets and wildflowers from the meadow behind the house. The food was potluck, the music provided by a local band that specialized in the kind of acoustic folk that made people want to dance, even if they weren't particularly good at it. Tommy had appointed himself official photographer, documenting every moment with the digital camera Michael had given him for his last birthday. As the evening progressed and the guests gradually departed, Michael found himself standing in the doorway of the garage, watching Elena dance with Tommy to a slow song about coming home. The boy's feet balanced on top of hers, his small hands clasped around her waist, his face glowing with the security of a child who knew he was loved unconditionally. Elena caught Michael's eye over Tommy's head and smiled, an expression that contained multitudes, gratitude for the journey that had brought them together, joy in the present moment, hope for all the moments still to come. Later, after Tommy had been tucked into bed with promises that nothing would change, except that now Elena would officially be his mom, Michael and Elena sat on the porch swing they'd installed on the front of the renovated house. The night was warm and clear, the stars brilliant in the unpolluted sky above Millbrook. Elena's head rested on Michael's shoulder, her wedding dress spread around them like silk clouds. The lotus necklace gleamed in the moonlight, no longer a symbol of abandonment and regret, but of love's ability to transcend even the deepest wounds. "Catherine would be proud," Elena said softly, her fingers tracing patterns on Michael's chest. "Not of what she did, but of what came from it. Of the family we've become despite her mistakes." Michael nodded, understanding that forgiveness wasn't about excusing Catherine's choices, but about refusing to let her absence define their presence. They'd built something beautiful from the materials she'd left behind, her guilt transformed into their determination, her regrets into their commitment, her lost love into their found family. The future stretched ahead of them, full of ordinary miracles and everyday challenges. Tommy would grow up and leave home eventually, would carry forward the lessons they'd taught him about choosing love over fear, about building rather than abandoning, about the power of showing up consistently for the people who mattered. There would be other children, perhaps, biological or adopted, joining their family through the same combination of choice and chance that had brought Elena into their lives. There would be business successes and failures, health scares and celebrations, all the accumulated experiences that transform a group of individuals into a family. But for now, in this moment, on this porch, under these stars, Michael Brooks felt something he'd spent 25 years believing he didn't deserve. Peace. Not the absence of struggle or sorrow, but the presence of love strong enough to weather whatever storms might come. Elena's breathing gradually deepened into sleep, her trust in his protection complete and unquestioning. Michael held her close, watching the stars wheel overhead, understanding finally that home wasn't a place but a choice, and he'd chosen well. In the morning, they would wake up married, would begin the ordinary work of building a life together. Tommy would demand pancakes shaped like architectural blueprints. Elena would check her email for new client inquiries. Michael would open the garage and begin another day of fixing things that were broken. But they would do it all together, as a family forged from choice rather than chance, as proof that love could grow in even the most unlikely soil. The lotus necklace would hang around Elena's neck for a few more years, until the day Tommy turned 16 and she fastened it around his throat with hands that shook slightly from emotion. "It's yours now," she'd tell him, but not as a burden. As a reminder that families can be lost and found, broken and mended, that love is stronger than abandonment, and choice is more powerful than circumstance. Tommy would wear it proudly, understanding even at 16 that he was carrying forward something precious and hard-won. But that morning was years in the future. For now, There was only this: the weight of Elena's trust against his chest, the sound of Tommy's peaceful breathing from upstairs, the knowledge that he'd finally learned the difference between surviving and living. Michael Brooks closed his eyes and let himself believe in happy endings, in second chances, in the revolutionary power of choosing to stay. Some stories ended with people walking away. This one was just beginning with people choosing to remain, to build, to love, despite every reason not to. And that, Michael thought as sleep finally claimed him, made all the difference.